A few weeks ago, I reviewed the RunCam Thumb, and at the time I did say that this could possibly be the new budget action camera king. Now, this camera was well received by many pilots because of its form factor, it being very lightweight and surprisingly very inexpensive. But there were some areas of concern, including a lackluster color science, an image that was overexposed, and a stabilization system that frankly didn't work. Now, at the time of filming, I did say that these were not deal breakers and could be rectified with their firmware update. Now, RunCam has proved me correct again by releasing a new firmware update for this camera, allowing full control of all the parameters and also updating the stabilization system in the camera. Now, with this new firmware, let's revisit this RunCam Thumb and see if it's a unanimous winner. Okay, so we're back from our test flight, and I've had some time to take a look at the footage, and the image from the RunCam Thumb is a little bit more pleasing than before. Alright, so let's start off with the stabilization of the image. Now, the gyroscopic information coming from this camera is obviously a little bit more accurate. It has to be. The first time I tried to stabilize this with the older firmware, it seemed like it was causing more harm than good. It was causing more shakes, more oscillations than stabilization. Now with this new firmware, the information is now more accurate and is doing a better job with the gyro flow on the computer. Now, is this stabilization perfect? I don't know. Let me know down below if you think this stabilization was really good. Now, as I said before, it's not a deal breaker. The image is significantly smoother than the firmware or the image on the older firmware. So there is an improvement there, at least, you know, if you are finding a different drone, maybe a Cinewhoop, or maybe you have some different weather conditions, you might get better images or better stabilization from this camera. Now, after my initial review of the RunCam Thumb, we did know that RunCam was going to issue a new firmware update to fix the gyroscopic information. What we didn't know was that they were going to also release a firmware update to give us full manual control of this camera. Now, I did say that in my initial review that this would be an amazing camera if we had manual control of all the parameters, whether it be white balance, exposure, frame rates. And sure enough, with this updated firmware, we do now have the ability to change all those parameters. Now, as a person who loves cameras and loves to film, obviously, that was a welcome sight for me. I still wish there was an app that we could plug this into our phones or computer, but this is really the next best thing. Now with this updated firmware, RunCam has issued a config file in the SD card, and that allows you to change any parameter that you want. Now my initial concern of this camera in the first review was just the exposure. And all I wanted was some ability to change that exposure, maybe lower the exposure. But with this firmware update, you can change every parameter. I have an example right here. You have a choice of 1080p 60 frames per second, 1080p 50 frames per second, and 1080p 30 frames per second. And to change any of these parameters, you just change the value right here, so it's pretty cut and dry. Besides that, you can add your gyroscopic information for recording on the SD card. You can have a loop recording interval, auto recording switch, so if you power on this camera, it will start to record automatically. And then you have the general settings, which is really important, pretty cool. You can change your exposure, which is pretty amazing. Default is 6. Brightness, which is another thing to adjust. Sharpness, which is pretty cool. Some people like to have their image a little bit sharper or less sharp. Then you have contrast, saturation, which is pretty cool, and white balance as well. You also have a mode here for power saving, which it's default to off. Now, the image you saw today, I did have the saturation almost at high, so I had it at 4. Now, the problem here is that, I wish that we had an app for this camera here, but you can easily change these settings and save it to the SD card. Now, you need to have a computer to do that. Now, there's ways around that. In my case, I just saved multiple different types of files with different parameters on here. So say I wanted one for sunny, one for dark, and you can just save that to your phone. That's exactly what I did. Now, all I did was use my micro USB to USB-A cord, and I put a OTG cable on here or adapter, and all I have to do is just transfer my file from my cell phone straight to the camera. My initial plan was to just put the file on the camera, connect my phone to the camera, open the file in the camera, just alter it, and then save it just like how I did on the computer. Unfortunately, I don't know of any app that can open this config file, although it's just text in here. I don't know of any app that can open it. Now, if you know of an app you can use on your cell phone that can open this file and save it, yeah, leave that down below. That'd be greatly appreciated. That would help the community. And therefore now you can just use your phone anywhere you want to just configure, make adjustments, and then save it in real time in the field. So that's pretty cool. All right, so what do I think about this camera now with the new firmware on here? I do think that this camera here is a winner. I thought it was a winner before, but this makes a more compelling argument to get this. And that's true because this camera here is currently sold out at most of the retailers. I can't find a place that has these in stock right now. So a lot of people are waiting for a restock of the RunCam Thumb. There's a lot of attraction with this camera. The size, the weight, everything just makes sense. And now you have the ability to use your gyroscopic information for stabilization, and you can change the parameters in the camera. It's almost a no-brainer, guys. So I do think the firmware update did make this even more attractive. With that said, I'm looking forward to more firmware updates from RunCam. Maybe they can make this more streamlined. Maybe make the file in here, the config file, a text file where I can change it with a mobile phone, or just make an app. That's probably too much, but if they can just change this to a text file so we can change it in our phone, as well as a version 2 of this camera, maybe a 4K version of this would be greatly appreciated, because what I'm noticing right now is when I put this into the Gyroflow application, it does crop in a bit, and that does, expose the limitation of the resolution of this camera, which is a 1080p resolution camera. So let me know what you think about the firmware on the RunCam Thumb. Is this a big improvement? Was this really needed? Now, if you want to see my full review on this camera or the Firefly X-Lite, I'll leave those videos linked right here. So thank you for watching. I will see you in the next video. Peace.